The jungle was thick and heavy with mist. The air smelled of wet earth, old trees, and secrets that had been buried for centuries. A single human walked alone on the narrow path, pushing away vines and branches as he moved deeper inside. His name was Daniel, a traveler and seeker of truth. People in the colony warned him again and again. Never step into the ancient jungle ruins. Never go near the forbidden gate. But curiosity burned inside his chest, stronger than fear. He wanted to see for himself the place that no one dared speak of for long. The trees opened into a clearing, and before him stood the gate. It was not built by humans, that much was clear at first sight. The stone was black, smooth, and taller than any man, covered in glowing alien markings. Strange symbols pulsed with faint blue light, as if the stone was alive and watching him. Daniel felt his heart beat faster, yet his steps did not stop. The gate seemed to whisper, not in words, but in a pull that dragged him closer. It was as if something inside wanted him to enter. Legends told that the gate belonged to the Mistress. She was a ruler, a guardian, a being of power that no outsider could look upon and live. The old hunters in the colony swore they heard screams in the night near the jungle. Some said the screams were warnings. Others said they were sacrifices, but Daniel never believed such tales. He thought they were only stories to keep children away from danger. Now, standing before the gate, he began to wonder if those stories were true. He reached out and touched the stone. It was warm, almost like skin, and a shock of energy rushed through his arm. Symbols flared brighter, lighting up the clearing with an eerie glow. The jungle went silent. Even the insects stopped singing. For a moment, Daniel froze, ready to run. But the gate slowly cracked open with a deep groan. A line of white light cut through the darkness inside, spilling out like a blade. Something ancient had awakened, and the human knew he had crossed a line that could never be undone. Inside was a tunnel, carved from the same dark stone. The walls shimmered faintly, as if tiny stars had been trapped within. Each step he took echoed too loud, bouncing back as if voices were following. He swallowed hard but kept walking, his boots scraping on the cold floor. The air smelled strange, like burning incense mixed with iron. His chest felt heavy, but still he pushed deeper, drawn toward the end. At last, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber. High pillars rose into the shadows above, carved with alien faces that stared down at him. In the center was an altar, glowing with strange fire, a blue flame that gave no heat. The symbols on the walls all lit up together, filling the room with a trembling hum. Daniel stepped closer, his hand reaching out as if the fire called him by name. But before he could touch it, a voice thundered from the shadows. "You entered where you should not, human." The words cracked like thunder, shaking the walls of the chamber. Daniel stumbled back, his eyes wide. From the far end of the hall, a figure stepped into the light. She was tall, her skin shimmering with silver light, her eyes burning gold. She wore robes that looked woven from night itself, each thread sparkling with hidden stars. Her presence was heavy, filling the chamber like a storm. This was no simple guardian. This was the Mistress herself. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Her gaze locked on him with fury. Yet behind that anger was something sharp, something curious. He felt like prey standing before a predator, yet he refused to kneel. His voice trembled but still spoke. I only came seeking answers." The Mistress raised her hand, and chains of light burst from the floor, wrapping around his wrists and ankles. He fell to his knees, struggling, but the glowing bonds held him tight. The fire on the altar flared higher as if feeding on his fear. The Mistress stepped closer, her voice cold and commanding. "No human has entered this place and lived," she said, her words echoing like blades in the air. Do you know the punishment for trespass? Daniel clenched his fists against the chains, his eyes staring up at her. I don't care about punishment, he whispered, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. I only want to know why this place calls to me. The chamber went silent. Even the flame bent lower as if listening. The mistress paused, her golden eyes narrowing. For the first time in centuries, a human had not begged, had not wept, had not tried to escape. Instead, he stood his ground, chained yet unbroken. The mistress tilted her head, her fury still burning, but her voice softened just slightly. Foolish human. Your arrogance will cost you more than your life. Daniel met her eyes, and for a moment, something passed between them. Not just fury, not just fear, but the first spark of something greater. The walls trembled again, as if the temple itself listened. The chains tightened, the fire roared, and the mistress raised her hand for judgment. But deep inside, a dangerous thought began to stir within her. Was this man a trespasser, or was he chosen? The chamber shook as the mistress stepped closer. Her golden eyes blazed like suns trapped in storm clouds. Daniel struggled against the glowing chains, but they only grew tighter, biting into his skin like fire. The air felt heavy, pressing down on him until it was hard to breathe. Every step of the mistress echoed like thunder, filling the chamber with her power. You dare to speak as if you have the right to question, she hissed, her voice both beautiful and terrifying. Her robes flowed behind her, each thread flickering with hidden stars, as though she carried the night sky itself. She raised her hand, and the altar flame leapt higher, spilling blue firelight across the alien walls. The carved faces seemed alive now, frowning at the intruder, judging him in silence. Daniel's heart pounded, but he forced himself to lift his head. I came here for truth, he said, his voice steady though his knees shook. I do not fear you. For a heartbeat, silence hung in the chamber. Then the mistress laughed, a sharp sound like glass shattering. You do not fear me, she repeated, her words dripping with mockery. No human leaves this place alive, yet you dare claim courage. The walls groaned as if the temple itself agreed with her fury. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the flame hissed louder. Daniel clenched his fists, refusing to bow his head. His body trembled, but his eyes stayed fixed on hers. For the first time, the mistress frowned, as if puzzled. You are fragile, she said, circling him like a predator around prey. Your bones break, your skin tears, your life flickers shorter than a candle flame. She leaned close, her breath cold against his ear. And yet, you walk into the forbidden gate, as if death is nothing. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat dry, but he did not answer. His silence spoke louder than words. The mistress snapped her fingers, and the chains yanked him upright, forcing him to his feet. Look at me, she commanded, and though fear tried to choke him, Daniel obeyed. Her gaze pierced into him, searching, measuring, like a blade pressed against his soul. You are not the first human to stumble here, she whispered. Her voice grew colder, her fury sharpening. But you may be the last. Daniel's chest rose and fell quickly, but his voice broke through the tension. Then why am I still alive? He asked, his tone almost defiant. Her eyes narrowed, fire flashing in their golden depths. The mistress's hand lifted, and the flames twisted into the shape of a serpent, coiling in the air. It hissed, glowing brighter, ready to strike. The chamber pulsed with danger. The smell of burning filled Daniel's lungs. He braced himself, expecting the fire serpent to end his life in a single strike. Yet the mistress hesitated. Something about his words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. The serpent hissed louder, but her hand trembled ever so slightly. She was fury itself, yet there was a crack in her anger. "Why do you stand?" she demanded suddenly, her voice breaking like thunder. "Every human before you begged. They wept. They screamed for mercy. But you—" Her words cut short as she leaned closer, studying his face. "You defy me even as the chains cut your flesh." Daniel forced a bitter smile, pain in his eyes but strength in his voice. "Maybe because I came here knowing death was waiting," he said quietly, "and I accepted it before I stepped through the gate." The mistress froze, her golden eyes widening for a brief second. It was a small crack in her mask, but it was there. The flame serpent dissolved into sparks, fading back into the altar fire. She turned away quickly, as if hiding something from him. Her voice was still sharp, but not as steady. "Foolish human, your words are nothing but pride," she said. "You think courage will save you from judgment." Daniel coughed, his body aching against the chains. "No, not courage," he whispered. "Only the truth." The mistress stopped mid-step, her back still to him. The chamber held its breath. Even the fire grew still. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The mistress finally turned, her face unreadable, her voice softer but edged with steel. "You will face trial," she declared. "Not today, not now, but at dawn, when the temple itself decides your fate." The chains pulled him down again, forcing him to his knees. The altar fire dimmed, leaving the chamber in deep shadow. Daniel lowered his head, his strength nearly gone. But inside something fierce still burned. He knew dawn would bring either freedom or death, and the mistress would be the one to deliver it. As she vanished into the shadows, her last words echoed through the chamber. "You have entered where you should not, human, and at dawn, the temple will judge your trespass." Daniel closed his eyes, breathing hard, his body broken but his spirit unyielding. For the first time since his journey began, he wondered if fate had led him here. The gate had called him, the fire had spared him, and now the mistress herself had hesitated. The night was long, but dawn was coming, and with it, a trial that could shake the stars. The night inside the temple was endless. Daniel sat against the cold floor, his body still bound by chains of light. Every time he tried to move, the bindings burned hotter, biting into his skin. The silence pressed heavy on him, broken only by the low hum of alien energy in the walls. He knew dawn would come soon, and with it, the judgment the mistress had promised. His thoughts raced, but his spirit refused to break. He had not walked into the forbidden gate by accident. Something had pulled him here, something older and stronger than fear. Even now, though death waited at sunrise, he could not regret stepping inside. The gate had called, and he had answered. From the shadows came the sound of footsteps, soft at first, then stronger, echoing through the vast chamber. Daniel lifted his head, expecting guards, expecting blades, but instead it was her. The mistress walked slowly toward him, her silver-lit skin glowing softly in the dark. Her golden eyes caught the faint light of the fire, sharp as burning suns. For a moment she only stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke, her voice calm but carrying the weight of storms. "You should be sleeping, human. It will be your last night alive." Daniel forced a dry laugh, though his throat ached. "I don't think sleep will change what waits for me at dawn." The mistress tilted her head, as if studying a puzzle she could not solve. "You are not like the others who came here," she said slowly. "They begged, they cursed, they broke before judgment. Yet you still stand within yourself." Daniel shifted against the chains, his eyes fixed on hers. "I came because I had to," he whispered. "Something about this place. It called to me." The mistress narrowed her eyes, stepping closer. "You dare to claim the temple itself summoned you?" she asked, her voice sharp. Daniel nodded, even as the chains burned hotter. "Yes," he said. "And you know it too, don't you?" Her hand twitched, as if she would strike him, yet she stopped. For a long breath, silence filled the chamber. The fire on the altar flickered low. Listening, the mistress leaned down, her face close enough that Daniel could feel the chill of her breath. "You do not understand what you speak of," she whispered. "This temple holds secrets even my people fear." Daniel's eyes did not waver, though his body trembled. "Then maybe that's why I'm here," he said, his voice steady. "Not to take, not to destroy, but to understand." The mistress's gaze lingered on him, her fury dimming into something else. Curiosity. She straightened, her robes whispering like nightfall as she turned away. "You are foolish," she said, her voice colder again. "But perhaps the temple will decide what I cannot." At last the sound of heavy boots broke the silence. Guards entered, their armor carved with alien symbols, their spears glowing faintly. They surrounded Daniel, lifting him with the chains that dragged at his limbs. The mistress walked ahead, her steps firm, her voice carrying like thunder. "Bring the human to the hall of fire," she commanded. "The temple will judge him when the sun rises." They dragged him through endless tunnels, walls alive with flickering light. Strange carvings seemed to follow him, alien eyes glowing in the stone. At last, they entered a vast hall, larger than any chamber he had seen yet. The ceiling disappeared into darkness, and in the center burned a pit of blue fire. The flames twisted and hissed, alive, almost hungry. Around the pit stood the council, robed figures with faces hidden by shadow. The mistress raised her hand, and the guards dropped Daniel to his knees before the fire. The chains tightened, forcing his arms wide, holding him in place. One of the council members stepped forward, their voice old and cold. "This human broke the law of the gate," they declared. "By our law, his blood must feed the flame." The hall filled with murmurs. The fire hissed louder, as if eager for his life. But the mistress raised her hand, silencing them. "Not yet," she said firmly, her golden eyes fixed on Daniel. "The fire must decide if he is guilty, or if the temple itself called him here." The council whispered among themselves, anger and disbelief in their voices, but they could not overrule her. Daniel lifted his head, staring at the roaring pit. If the fire spared him, he might live. If not, he would burn to nothing. The mistress's gaze lingered on him, and though her voice was harsh, there was a shadow of something softer beneath. "Prepare yourself, human," she said. "When dawn comes, you will walk through the fire, and the temple will give its judgment." Daniel's body ached, but his spirit did not falter. He stared at the flames, feeling their strange pull. Somehow, deep inside, he knew they would not consume him. He did not know why, but he believed it. The council turned away, muttering. The guards dragged him aside, chaining him to a pillar at the edge of the hall. The mistress stood for a long time before the fire, her eyes narrowed, her thoughts unreadable. Then, without another word, she vanished into the shadows, leaving Daniel with the roaring flames. He closed his eyes, breathing slowly. The fire hissed like a living thing, whispering, calling, and Daniel knew the dawn would bring either his end, or the beginning of something far greater. The fire in the great hall burned brighter as dawn approached. Its blue flames swirled like a storm, casting shadows that moved across the ancient walls. Daniel sat chained to the pillar, his body weak, but his mind sharp and restless. He had survived the night, yet the hardest trial was still to come. Soon, the temple itself would decide if he lived or died. His thoughts circled back to the mistress. Her fury had been sharp, her command absolute. Yet something in her eyes had flickered. It was not only rage that burned there, but curiosity, almost doubt. Daniel felt it when she questioned him, when she hesitated to end his life, as though even she did not fully understand the power of the temple. The council stood near the fire, whispering among themselves, their robes dragged across the stone floor, their hidden faces turned toward him with cold judgment. One of them spoke, his voice deep and harsh. "This human is dangerous. He has stirred the flames." Another hissed, "The temple reacts to him. It should not. It never has." Their words carried fear, not just anger, and Daniel noticed it. Then, footsteps echoed across the hall, clear and commanding. The mistress entered, her golden eyes glowing brighter in the fire's light. The council bowed their heads slightly, though their movements were stiff. She ignored them, walking straight toward the chained human. For a long moment, she studied him in silence, her face unreadable. Then she spoke, her voice low but firm. "The dawn is here, human," she said. "The fire waits for your trial." Daniel lifted his head, his body aching, but his spirit holding strong. "Tell me one thing before it ends," he said softly. "Why does even your council fear this place?" The mistress paused, her eyes narrowing. Her voice grew quieter, but sharper, like a blade sliding from its sheath. "You speak too boldly," she said. "Yet you ask what even my people whisper only in shadows." Daniel held her gaze, refusing to look away. "You said yourself the temple holds secrets even you fear," he answered. "I think those secrets are the reason I was called here." Her lips pressed into a thin line, her hand curling at her side. For a heartbeat, she looked as though she might strike him down herself, but instead, she turned slightly, her gaze on the blue fire. "Long before my reign, before even my ancestors, this temple stood," she whispered. "It was not built by my kind, nor by yours, but by those who came before." Her eyes glowed brighter, as if the fire's reflection revealed her hidden thoughts. "They left power behind, power that lives in the walls, in the stone, in the fire," she continued. "No one has ever entered and survived without our blessing. And yet, you did." Daniel's heart pounded as her words sank into him. The chains burned against his wrists, but he leaned forward, desperate to hear more. "What are they, those who came before?" he asked. The mistress's gaze snapped back to him, sharp and commanding. "Enough," she hissed, though her voice trembled slightly. "You will know only if you live through the fire." The council stirred uneasily, their whispers sharp like knives. "He must not be spared," one said. "The temple chooses nothing, it only destroys." Another added. The mistress lifted her hand, silencing them, her voice cutting through the hall like thunder. "The temple will decide," she declared. "Not you, not me, but the fire itself." The guards moved forward, unlocking his chains from the pillar but keeping them tight on his wrists. They dragged Daniel toward the fire pit, the heat pressing against his skin though the flames gave no smoke. He stumbled but stood tall, his eyes locked on the glowing blue blaze. Every step closer made his chest tighten. Yet something inside him called to the fire. It was not fear he felt, but recognition, like returning to a place he had always known. The mistress watched him carefully, her eyes unreadable. In her stance was fury, but also something deeper. She too wanted to know why this human had come, why the fire stirred for him, and though her voice rang out cold, it carried a shadow of doubt. "Walk through, human," she commanded. "If you are chosen, the flames will spare you. If not, they will consume you." Daniel stood at the edge, the fire swirling like a living beast. The council leaned forward, waiting for his death. The guards gripped their weapons tightly, their eyes wide with unease. The mistress's breath caught, though she hid it well. Daniel stepped forward, the heat blasting his face, his arms trembling. Then, with no more hesitation, he walked into the fire. Blue flames wrapped around him, swallowing his body whole. Gasps filled the hall, the council shouted. The guards stumbled back. But Daniel did not scream, he did not burn. The fire bent around him, curling like waves around stone. The light glowed brighter, pulsing with strange energy. Symbols carved into the walls blazed alive, shining like stars. The mistress's eyes widened, her fury breaking into shock. The council roared in anger, their voices trembling with fear. Daniel walked through the flames untouched, his skin unburned, his eyes filled with firelight. When he stepped out the other side, silence fell across the hall. The fire roared high behind him, not in hunger, but in recognition. The temple had chosen. The mistress stared at him, her voice a whisper now. "This should not be possible," she said, her tone shaking for the first time. Her golden eyes locked on his, and something unspoken passed between them. The council hissed with rage, their fear spilling into the air. "This human is cursed," they shouted. "No, he is marked," another said, trembling. Daniel stood tall, his chest rising, his spirit unbroken. The fire had spared him, and that meant something even the mistress could not deny. For the first time, she looked at him not as prey, not as a trespasser, but as something far more dangerous. And deep inside, she wondered if fate had brought him here not for punishment, but for destiny. The hall was silent, yet the silence was louder than thunder. The fire blazed high behind Daniel, its blue flames twisting like a living storm. Every eye in the chamber fixed on him, a human who had walked through death's flame and emerged untouched. The council trembled, their robed figures pulling back in fear and anger. The guards gripped their weapons tighter, but even their alien steel seemed useless now. The mistress stood at the edge of the fire pit, her golden eyes wide. For the first time in centuries, she had seen the impossible, a mortal human surviving the sacred flames, walking through as though he belonged to them. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the hall like steel. "The temple has spoken," she said. "He is not destroyed, therefore he is chosen." The council erupted in fury. "This cannot be," one shouted, his voice shaking with rage. "The fire spares no trespasser," another cried. "He is a curse, a danger, a liar." Their words clashed like blades, filling the hall with chaos. Yet none dared approach Daniel, who still stood with firelight dancing in his eyes. Daniel's chest rose and fell, his body trembling from the strange power that had wrapped around him. But he stood tall, facing them all. "I came seeking truth," he said, his voice rough but steady, "and the fire itself has answered me." His words silenced the room again, his courage as sharp as the flames that had spared him. The mistress turned toward the council, her expression hard. "You doubt the will of the temple?" she asked, her voice heavy with command. The robed figures shifted uneasily. They whispered but did not answer. The mistress raised her hand, her robes swirling like night around her. "Then you doubt me?" she thundered, her voice shaking the stone walls. The council froze, none daring to speak further. Daniel looked at her, his eyes searching her face. For a moment, he saw something beyond her fury, hesitation, perhaps even respect. Yet her next words were sharp, laced with fire. "You may have survived the flames, human," she said, "but surviving does not make you free." Daniel frowned, his body tense. "What more do you want from me?" he asked, his voice filled with defiance. The mistress stepped closer, her gaze burning into him. "The fire chose you, yes, but to what end?" she asked. "Was it mercy, or was it a test of greater judgment yet to come?" Her voice grew darker, colder. "You walked through, but now you must carry what the fire has marked you with." Daniel's heart pounded, though he kept his head high. "What does that mean?" he asked, though a part of him already knew. The mistress extended her hand, her palm glowing with the same blue flame. "Show me," she commanded. Daniel hesitated, then lifted his own hand slowly. The fire leapt from her palm to his skin, wrapping around his hand like living light. Instead of burning, it sank into him, glowing inside his veins. Gasps filled the hall, the council recoiling in shock. Even the guards stepped back, crossing themselves with alien signs of fear. Daniel felt the energy rush through him, sharp and heavy, yet strangely familiar. It filled his chest, his arms, his very heartbeat. When it faded, a faint mark remained on his skin. A glowing symbol, the same that had been carved on the temple walls. The mistress's voice trembled, though she tried to keep it firm. "The temple has branded you," she said. "You are marked as one bound to it, whether by destiny or curse." Daniel stared at the mark, his hand shaking. He had not asked for power, he had only sought truth. Yet the temple had given him something no human had ever carried before. He looked up at the mistress, his voice steady. "Then I am not your prisoner anymore," he said quietly. Her eyes narrowed, fire flashing in her golden gaze. "You are not free," she answered coldly. "You are tied to this place, and that means tied to me." The council hissed with anger, their voices rising again. "This cannot be allowed," they shouted. "End him before the mark grows stronger." But the mistress raised her hand, silencing them again. Her gaze never left Daniel. "He will not be ended," she declared. "He will remain until I decide his fate." Daniel met her eyes, refusing to back down. There was no fear left in him, only the strange fire that burned within. The mistress turned away sharply, her voice carrying across the hall. "Take him to the chamber of chains," she ordered the guards. "Keep him alive, but do not loosen the bindings." The guards hesitated, but obeyed, dragging Daniel toward the dark tunnels again. As he was pulled away, Daniel glanced back at the mistress. For a heartbeat, her eyes met his. There was fury there, yes, but also conflict. Something in her gaze whispered that she did not see him only as a trespasser anymore, but as something dangerous, something important, something she could not yet name. The fire roared behind them, the council seething in whispers. The guards marched him into darkness, their spears glowing faintly in the shadows. The mark on his skin pulsed softly, like a heartbeat not his own. Daniel did not know if it was curse or gift, but he knew one thing for certain. The temple had chosen him, and that choice would change everything. The chains dragged heavy on Daniel's wrists as the guards led him down the twisting tunnels. The stone walls glowed faintly, pulsing with the same symbols that now burned on his skin. Each step echoed in the silence, each breath carrying the weight of something greater than himself. Though his body ached, inside him the fire still pulsed, strong and steady. The mark from the flames was alive, whispering to him in ways he could not explain. At last, the guards shoved him into a chamber, dark and cold. The door sealed with a deep thud, leaving him chained against the wall. Blue light shimmered faintly from the mark on his hand, painting strange shapes on the stone. Daniel leaned back, breathing hard, his thoughts storming inside. He was no longer simply a trespasser, no longer just a man who broke a rule. The temple had marked him, and that meant something powerful, something dangerous. Time passed in silence, until soft footsteps broke the air. Daniel lifted his head, his eyes narrowing. It was her. the mistress, entering the chamber, her golden eyes glowing like firelight in the dark. The guards did not follow. She had come alone. For a long moment she only stood there, her gaze locked on him. Finally, she spoke, her voice lower than before. "You should not be alive," she said, her words cutting like a blade. "The fire spares no one, yet it spared you." Daniel lifted his chained hands, showing her the glowing mark. "Maybe because I was meant to be here," he answered quietly. Her eyes narrowed, her fury flashing again. "Do not mistake survival for destiny, human," she snapped. "The fire may have spared you, but you belong to me now." Daniel smirked, though his body trembled with exhaustion. "Belong to you," he said, "or belong to the temple?" Her jaw tightened, her golden eyes sharp as knives. "You walk on dangerous ground with your words," she warned. But Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady. "Then answer me. Why didn't you end me when you had the chance?" Silence filled the chamber, heavy and sharp. The mistress turned her head slightly, avoiding his eyes. Her robe shimmered like starlight as she moved closer. "Perhaps," she said softly, "I wanted to see what the temple saw in you." Daniel's chest tightened at her words. There it was, the truth he had sensed, hidden behind her fury. "You are not my ally," she said firmly, her voice louder now. "You are still a trespasser, a human who broke into sacred ground." She stepped closer, standing only a few feet away, her presence heavy and commanding. "But," her voice softened again, barely more than a whisper, "the fire has tied you to this place, and to me, whether I like it or not." Daniel lifted his head higher, refusing to bow. "Then maybe we are both bound," he said, his tone calm. "You don't fully understand this temple, do you?" Her golden eyes flared with anger, but also with something else. Hesitation. She turned away sharply, her robe sweeping against the floor. "You know nothing," she said, though her voice trembled ever so slightly. He leaned forward against the chains, his eyes fixed on her. "You said it yourself. The temple was not built by your kind, and not by mine," he pressed. "Then why does it respond to me? Why did the fire choose me?" The mistress froze, her back still to him, her fingers clenched at her side, as though his words struck something deep within her. Finally, she turned, her face unreadable. "Perhaps the temple sees in you what it once saw in those who built it," she whispered. "Or perhaps it only seeks to destroy me through you." Daniel frowned, his voice firm. "Or perhaps it seeks to unite us." Her golden eyes flashed, her anger returning sharp and fierce. "Do not speak of unity," she said coldly. "You and I are enemies by law, by blood, by everything that separates us." Daniel gave a small, tired smile. "Maybe the fire doesn't care about your laws," he said. "Maybe it only cares about truth." Her fury broke for a moment, her lips parting in silence. She stepped closer again, leaning down so her face was only inches from his. "You test me, human?" she whispered, her voice trembling with both rage and something else. "You test the edge of my mercy." Daniel held her gaze, unflinching. "Or maybe I test the edge of your doubt," he answered. Her eyes widened slightly, the golden fire flickering in ways she could not hide. She stood there for a long time, staring at him as if trying to decide if he was fool, or something more. Then she turned abruptly, her robe flaring, her voice sharp again. "The council will not accept you," she said. "They will try to end you no matter what the fire declared." Daniel's chest rose and fell, his voice quiet but firm. "Then you'll have to choose," he whispered. "Will you protect me, or destroy me?" Her steps slowed at his words, her body tense. She did not answer, but the silence itself carried weight. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft, almost to herself. "I do not know yet, human." Her golden eyes turned back to him one last time, and in that look was not only fury, but conflict, even a spark of something she dared not name. Then she vanished into the shadows, leaving Daniel chained and restless. The mark on his skin pulsed brighter, answering the fire's call in the distance. Daniel closed his eyes, knowing the trial was no longer just about survival. It was about her, about the mistress, and the choice she would one day be forced to make, between seeing him as an enemy or something far more dangerous. Dawn broke over the ancient jungle, though no light touched the deep heart of the temple. Inside, the great hall stirred with voices. The council gathered once more. Their shadows stretched long in the firelight, their whispers sharp and bitter. "The human must be destroyed." One hissed, "The fire's mark is a trick, a lie, a danger." Another growled, their fear filled the air heavier than smoke. The guards stood restless, their spears glowing faintly. Even they did not know what to believe anymore, for the fire had chosen a human, and that truth could not be undone. But fear breeds anger, and anger demands blood. The council wanted Daniel's death before the mark on his skin grew stronger. Daniel was brought into the hall, his wrists still chained. The glowing symbol on his hand pulsed like a heartbeat, casting light across the floor. He looked tired, worn, yet his eyes burned with steady fire. He had survived the flames, and that truth gave him strength. He stood before the council, his chest rising proudly despite the weight of the chains. Then she entered. The mistress walked through the great doors, her presence silencing every voice. Her golden eyes shone with fire, her robe flowing like the night sky itself. Every step echoed with command, her aura filling the hall with both beauty and terror. She looked at Daniel first, then at the council, and her voice rang out like thunder. "The temple has spoken," she declared. "The fire spared him, the mark has bound him, and I will not allow his death." The council erupted in fury, their voices clashing like storms. "You betray the law," one shouted. "You betray your people," another accused. But the mistress raised her hand, her voice cutting them down. "I betray nothing," she thundered. "It is you who would betray the will of the temple by denying what has been shown." The chamber trembled with her words, dust falling from the high pillars. The fire roared higher as if agreeing with her. Still, the council pressed on, their voices desperate. "If you will not destroy him, then you are no longer fit to rule." The mistress's golden eyes flashed dangerously. Her voice dropped lower, colder, filled with deadly calm. "Then come and take my throne," she whispered. Silence struck the chamber. None dared step forward. The council shifted uneasily, their courage broken, for even they feared her wrath more than they hated the human. Daniel watched in silence, his chest tightening. He saw her standing against her own people, defying them all, not for him alone, but for the truth she could no longer deny. The mistress turned back to him, her eyes sharp. "You are still a trespasser," she said, her voice firm. "You broke the law of this gate, and I will never forget it." Daniel met her gaze, his voice steady. "And yet you spared me," he whispered. Her lips tightened, her fury fighting with something hidden. "You stand because the temple marked you, not because of me," she snapped. But even as she spoke, her eyes softened, betraying what her words could not hide. She stepped closer, so near he could feel the storm in her breath. "Do not mistake this for mercy," she said, though her voice trembled. "Your life belongs to me now, and I will decide what to do with it." Daniel's heart pounded, the mark on his hand glowing brighter. The fire behind them roared, the walls of the temple pulsing with ancient energy. It was as if the whole place listened, waiting for her decision. The council's whispers echoed in the shadows. The guards stood frozen, caught between fear and awe, and the mistress's eyes locked on his, golden and unyielding. For a long moment, time itself seemed to pause. Daniel spoke softly, his words cutting through the silence. "You don't want to destroy me," he said. "You want to know why the fire chose me." Her chest rose sharply, her jaw tightening, but she did not deny it. Instead, she whispered, almost to herself, "Perhaps the fire brought you here not to die, but to change everything." The council gasped in outrage, their voices rising in fury. "This cannot be allowed," they cried. But the mistress raised her hand once more, her command absolute. "Enough," she thundered. "This human is not a curse, nor a trick. He is marked by the temple itself, and I will protect what the fire has chosen." Daniel's heart raced as her words echoed through the chamber. He had entered this place as prey, bound for death. Now he stood as something else entirely, something even she could not explain. The mistress stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. Her voice dropped low, so only he could hear. "You are mine now," she whispered, her tone a storm of fury, doubt, and something more. "Not as a prisoner, not as prey, but as the one the fire has bound to me." Daniel breathed deeply, his chains heavy, but his spirit stronger than ever. He saw in her eyes the choice she had made, not just to spare him, but to claim him, to tie his fate to hers in a way no council, no law, no power could undo. The fire roared higher, the temple trembling as if in approval. And in that moment, Daniel knew the truth. The mistress was no longer only his enemy. She was now his ally, or perhaps something even greater. The hall shook with the whispers of the council, the anger of the guards, and the roar of the fire. But all of it faded against the weight of her choice. She had spared him, protected him, and bound him, and nothing in the universe would ever be the same again.